A silver cup smashed against the wall. A small boy stood in the middle of the room, fists clenched, face red. His mouth opened. A sound came out that wasn't a word. It was the cry of a child with no way to be heard. Servants froze. A nurse covered her mouth. A man in fine clothing rose from his chair, his hand lifted to strike. Then a young woman stepped between them. She wore the plain wool of a kitchen maid. The linens she carried fell to the floor. Her hands rose. Her fingers moved. Fast, precise, deliberate. The boy went still. His small hands lifted, and they began to move with hers. The Duke of Ashbourne could not breathe. His son had not understood a soul in 7 years. What did this maid know that no physician in the kingdom ever had? Stay with me on this one. The Duke's hand was still raised. He lowered it slowly, as if he had forgotten his own arm. The boy clung to the maid's skirt. His small fingers kept moving against her wrist, asking something. Her hands answered him gently this time. He nodded. Then he hid his face in the wool of her apron. The room had not breathed in over a minute. The nurse was the first to move. She bent and began picking up the linens from the floor with shaking hands. She would not look at anyone. The other servants drifted backward toward the doors, eyes down, faces stiff with the kind of dread that comes from watching something they could not name. The Duke spoke. His voice was quiet. That was worse. "You," he said, "come with me." The maid hesitated. She looked down at the boy. He clutched her tighter. Her fingers moved twice against the back of his hand. He let go. She rose, smoothed her apron, and followed. Now here's the thing you need to understand about the Duke of Ashbourne. He was not a cruel man. He was a broken one. There is a difference. But the people under his roof had learned that the second kind could do more damage than the first. His name was Henry. His son was Edmund. Edmund had been born without sound 7 years before, on a winter night that had taken the Duke's wife with it. The Duchess had died with her hand pressed to the infant's forehead, whispering a prayer that her boy would one day know the world the way other children did. He had never known it. For 7 years, Edmund had lived inside silence. He had screamed and torn at things and broken what could be broken because there was no other way to say what was happening inside him. The household had grown used to it. The Duke had grown thinner. He had spent fortunes. He had brought in physicians from London, from Edinburgh, from Paris. He had paid men to wave bells in his son's face, to press tuning forks against the boy's skull, to bleed him, to feed him strange tinctures. Nothing had worked. Nothing had even slowed it. The boy was treated like a wild thing in his own home. And the Duke loved him. That was the worst of it. In the study, the Duke sat down behind a heavy desk. He did not invite the maid to sit. He looked at her for a long moment before he spoke. "Where did you learn that?" he said. "A school, sir." "What school?" She hesitated. "A school that helped children like your son, my lord. In the South." "You were a pupil?" "I was a helper, sir." "And how does a kitchen maid come to be a helper at such a school?" She did not answer. The Duke leaned forward. He was a tall man, broad in the shoulders, and the desk seemed small under his hands. "You will tell me your full name, your previous employer, and how it is that a girl I hired through an agency 3 weeks ago to scrub pots and carry linens speaks the language of the dumb better than any man I have paid in 7 years. My name is and Hartley, sir. And the rest. I would rather not say, my lord." The Duke's jaw tightened, but something in her voice stopped him from pressing. It was not defiance. It was the calm of someone who had already lost everything she could lose, and who had decided long ago that some things she would not give up. He sat back. "My son," he said. "Did he understand you?" "Yes, sir." "How could he? He has been taught nothing." "He has been watching, my lord. Children do." The Duke was silent for a long time. "Tomorrow morning," he said, "you will come to the nursery. You will show me what you did. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir." "Go." She went. When the door closed, the Duke opened a drawer in his desk. From it he took a small leather-bound notebook. The leather was worn pale where his thumb had pressed against it 1,000 times. He opened it to a page near the end. There was a single line written in a woman's hand. The ink had faded to brown. May he one day know words. He sat with the notebook open until the candles burned down to stubs. The next morning the Duke stood in the doorway of the nursery and watched, and sat cross-legged on the rug. Edmund sat opposite her. She had a wooden cup in one hand and an apple in the other. She set the cup down. She made a shape with her fingers. The boy made the same shape. She nodded. She picked up the apple, made a different shape. The boy copied her. She did it again. Cup, apple, cup, apple. Then she hid the apple behind her back and made the shape for it. The boy looked confused for a moment. Then he laughed. The Duke had not heard his son laugh in 7 years. He had heard him scream. He had heard him make the broken sounds of frustration. He had never heard him laugh. He turned away from the door so that no one would see his face. That was the beginning, and came every morning. She came every afternoon. The Duke gave permission for her to leave her other duties, and she focused entirely on the boy. Within a week, Edmund could ask for water. He could ask for bread. He could ask for the nurse whose name he had a special sign for. 3 quick taps to the side of the nose. The nurse cried the first time she saw it. He learned the sign for father. The Duke spent 2 hours every evening learning signs himself. He was clumsy. His big hands could not seem to make the smaller shapes. Edmund laughed at him. The Duke pretended to scowl and the boy laughed harder. One night, the Duke managed to ask his son, in halting fingers, "Are you happy?" Edmund put his small hand on his father's cheek and made a sign that meant yes, very. That night the Duke wept into his hands in his bedroom. He had not wept since the funeral. The household did not approve. You have to understand. Servants in a great house live by an order that has been the same for generations. A kitchen maid does not become a teacher. A teacher does not eat at the master's table. A man does not learn signs from a woman who scrubs his floors. When the order breaks, the people who depend on it grow afraid. The housekeeper, Mrs. Larch, was the worst. She had served 3 generations of Ashbournes. She watched, and with the kind of patience a cat reserves for a bird. She did not raise her voice. She did not complain to the Duke. She simply began, in her own quiet way, to ask questions. She wrote letters. She made inquiries. She had connections in London. She had time. She was sure of one thing, and Hartley was not who she said she was. In the meantime, the Duke summoned a physician he had consulted years before. Dr. Ashworth was a thin man with sharp shoulders and a London practice he was proud of. He had once charged the Duke a fortune to inform him that Edmund's case was hopeless. The Duke brought him to the nursery now to watch. Dr. Ashworth watched for 5 minutes. His mouth grew thin. "Your Grace," he said, "I must advise you to stop this." The Duke turned. "Stop what?" "This. What this woman is doing. She is teaching him. She is teaching him to gesture. Your Grace, the science is settled. A child who learns to gesture will never learn to speak. He will be cut off from polite society forever. He will be a curiosity, a sideshow. There is a movement in France, in America, that encourages this. It is dangerous. It is unnatural. The proper course is oral instruction, speech, lip reading. Anything else is a crutch he will never let go of." The Duke watched his son sign a question to Anne. He watched and answer. He watched Edmund smile and nod and reach for the cup of milk she had pointed to. "Dr. Ashworth," he said quietly, "for 7 years you and your colleagues taught my son nothing. Today he asked his nurse for breakfast and was understood. You may keep your science. You may keep your bill. Get out of my house." The doctor left. A week passed. 2 weeks. The Duke and his son built a private vocabulary that grew every day. The nurse learned. The butler learned. 3 of the younger servants learned because they wanted to. Edmund stopped throwing things. He still had bad days. Children do. But the screaming had ended. One evening, just before bed, Anne sat with Edmund in the nursery. She was teaching him to spell his own name with his fingers. He got it right the 3rd time and his face split into a grin. He looked at her for a long moment. Then his small hands rose. He signed 3 slow, careful signs. "I love you," and pressed her hand to her mouth. She signed back slower still. Asterisk, "You are brave. You are clever. You are loved." Asterisk. The boy reached up and wrapped his arms around her neck. The Duke watched from the doorway. He had been about to come in to say good night. He stopped. He could not have spoken if he had wanted to. He stepped back into the corridor and stood there with his back against the wall and his eyes closed. He thought to himself, with the certainty of a man who has crossed a long desert and finally seen water, that the worst part was over. His son had a way to speak. His son was loved. His house had a small piece of peace in it again. He went to bed believing it. He should have known better. The carriage came at first light. It came up the long drive at a steady, unhurried pace, drawn by 2 black horses and driven by a man in plain dark clothes. It stopped at the front steps. 2 men got down. One was a magistrate's clerk in a brown coat. The other was a thick-set man with a leather satchel and the still, watchful eyes of someone whose job is to take people somewhere they do not want to go. The clerk knocked once. The butler opened the door. He looked at the papers the clerk held out. His face changed. He turned and went up the stairs at a pace too fast for his age. The Duke was at breakfast. The butler whispered to him. The Duke set down his cup. He walked, without hurrying, to the front hall. "Gentlemen," he said. The clerk bowed. "Your Grace, we are here on the authority of the magistrate of the county of Warwick. We have a warrant for the arrest of a young woman in your service. The name is Constance Renshaw. She may be known to your household by another name." The Duke's expression did not change. "On what charge?" "Several, Your Grace. Unpaid debts. Flight from a sworn marriage contract. Misrepresentation of identity in the taking of employment. The detail is in the papers." "I see." The Duke took the papers. He read them slowly. His face gave nothing away. But somewhere upstairs, in the nursery, Edmund had heard the strange voices in the hall and had come to the top landing with and behind him, and saw the men. She saw the papers in the Duke's hand. She closed her eyes for a long moment. Then she opened them and walked down the stairs. Edmund followed her. He had seen her face. He knew. He ran the last few steps and threw both arms around her waist and held on. The Duke looked up. He saw his son holding onto and the way a drowning child holds onto a rope. He saw the men with their papers waiting to take her. He saw in that moment what was actually being taken from him. He turned to the clerk. "You will wait," he said. "In the morning room. The girl will be made ready. I will accompany her to your magistrate." The clerk hesitated. "You will wait," the Duke said again. The clerk bowed and walked away. The Duke knelt down to his son's level. His big hands, slow and clumsy still, but a little better than before, began to move. "I will not lose her," he signed. "Promise." Edmund's eyes filled. His small hands rose. "You promise. Promise." The boy nodded once and let go of Anne and took his father's hand instead. The Duke felt something move in his chest that was not pain and was not grief. It was the kind of weight a man takes up willingly because there is no longer any choice. If you are still with me, take a second and hit that subscribe button. There's more coming, and the next part is where the story really turns. In the morning room, with the door closed, the Duke spoke to Anne. "Constance Renshaw." "Yes." "Tell me." She told him. Her father had been Sir Thomas Renshaw, a baron of modest means, a kind man with a weak head for accounts. He had borrowed money from a London creditor named Lord Faulkner. Faulkner was a man with a smile and clean linen and the cold heart of a serpent. The debts had grown. Anne's father had not understood how. Anne, who had been allowed to read books and who had been clever from the cradle, had begun to look at the accounts herself. She had found things that were not right, sums altered, interest applied that had not been agreed. A debt of £2,000 that, by Faulkner's books, had grown into 8 in 3 years. She had told her father. He had not believed her. Then he had begun to believe her, but it was too late. Faulkner had come to the house with an offer. He would forgive the debts in exchange for a single thing. And herself. A marriage. Title for him. A wife who would not speak of what she had seen. Her father, broken and bewildered, had signed the contract. He had died 3 months later, and had fled the night before the wedding. She had cut her hair short. She had taken her mother's maiden name. She had gone into service in London under the name Anne Hartley. From there, by way of an agency, she had come to Ashbourne Hall. "And the school," the Duke said, "where you learned the signs." "My younger brother," Anne said quietly. "He was born deaf. My father sent him to a school in the south, a small one, run by a clergyman who had studied with the French. I went with him in the holidays. I learned with him. He died of a fever when he was 12. After that I kept practicing because," her voice caught, "because I did not want to forget him." The Duke was silent. "They will not take you to a magistrate today," he said. "They will take you to Faulkner. You understand that?" "Yes." "And he will not let you go." "No." The Duke stood up. "Then we will go to him together," he said. "And we will end this." The drive to Warwick took half a day. The Duke rode in the carriage with Anne. Edmund had begged to come. The Duke had let him. The boy slept against Anne's shoulder for most of the journey. They were not taken to a magistrate's office. They were taken to a country house outside the town. A house with too many windows and a gate that closed behind them. The Duke noted these things without changing his expression. He sent his own footman, quietly, to ride for the nearest barrister he knew and to bring him to that gate by morning. Lord Faulkner met them in a long room with a fire that had been built up too high. He was perhaps 40. He had pale eyes and a soft voice and the kind of hands that had never carried anything heavier than a pen. He smiled when he saw Anne. "Constance," he said, "you look well. Service agrees with you," and did not answer. He turned to the Duke. "Your Grace, this is a delicate matter. I had not expected the inconvenience of your involvement. I will compensate you for your time. The girl is mine by contract. The contract is signed. I can show it to you if you wish." He produced a folded paper from a drawer and laid it on the table. The Duke did not look at it. Was the contract signed under duress? It was signed, witnessed, sealed. Was it signed under duress? A debt is duress, Your Grace. Every signed contract on this earth was signed under some pressure or other. The law does not care. "My barrister will arrive in the morning," the Duke said. "He will care." Faulkner's smile did not move, but his eyes did, just for a second. "Your Grace," he said, "I would advise you to take your boy and go home. This is a private matter between Miss Renshaw and myself. It is not private any longer. You do not know what this woman is. I know what she has done in my house. I know what she has done for my son. I am uninterested in your description of her." Faulkner looked at Anne. "Have you told him," he said, "that you cost your own father his life?" And flinched. The Duke saw it. He stepped between them. "You will not speak to her," he said, "until tomorrow. You will not come near her tonight. You will not enter the room she sleeps in. If you do, my lord, I will not need a court. Do you understand me?" Faulkner understood him. The night was long, and slept in a small room with a bolt on the door and Edmund beside her. The Duke did not sleep at all. He sat in a chair in the corridor with a pistol on his knee. At dawn the barrister arrived. He was a small, sharp man named Mr. Holloway with steel spectacles and a precise mouth. He listened to the Duke for 10 minutes. He read the contract. He read the papers the clerk had brought to Ashbourne Hall. He said, "We will not deal with Lord Faulkner. We will go directly to the assizes. The judge sitting this week is Sir Edward Combe. I have argued before him. He is fair. He hates a forged ledger." They went. The courtroom was not large. It smelled of beeswax and old paper. Sir Edward Combe sat at the bench. Faulkner sat at one table with two of his own men. The Duke and Mr. Holloway sat at another. Edmund sat in a small chair beside his father, swinging his feet, watching everything. Mr. Holloway laid out the evidence. He had brought Anne's ledger, pages she had copied in secret years before, of the entries that had not added up. He compared them to the figures Faulkner had used to claim the debt. The court clerk did the arithmetic out loud. There were gasps from the gallery. There was a sound from Faulkner like a man swallowing a sharp thing. Then Anne testified. She was steady. Her voice did not shake. She told the court about her father. She told them about the night the contract was signed. She said her father had been weeping. She said Faulkner had brought two men with him. She said the pen had been put into her father's hand by one of those men. She said her father had asked, in a whisper, what would happen to his daughter. She said Faulkner had answered, "She will be cared for, sir," and had smiled. Then Mr. Holloway turned and gestured, and the Duke lifted Edmund and set him on the witness stand. The boy could not speak, but the Duke had brought, with him from London, the clergyman from the small southern school where Anne had once gone. The clergyman stood by the boy and watched his hands. Edmund signed. "My name is Edmund." The clergyman translated, slowly, clearly. "I am the son of the Duke of Ashbourne. For 7 years no one heard me, and taught me how to speak with my hands, and gave me my father back. She is good. She is kind. Please do not let the man take her." The court was silent. Sir Edward Combe looked at Anne. He looked at the boy. He looked at the contract on the table. He cleared his throat. The marriage contract, he ruled, was void. It had been signed under coercion by a man whose accounts had been falsified. The debt itself had been falsified. The warrant was withdrawn. Miss Renshaw was free. Lord Faulkner stood and walked out of the courtroom without a word. He had 3 creditors of his own waiting outside. They followed him. In the carriage going home, Edmund fell asleep with his head on Anne's lap. The Duke watched her stroke the boy's hair. He did not speak. He did not need to. Spring came late that year. By the time the apple trees blossomed in the orchard at Ashbourne Hall, Edmund had grown 2 inches and learned 300 signs and could spell his own full name with his fingers without looking. He could also write it on paper in a careful round hand, and he liked to leave little notes for the kitchen staff that they could not read and that he would translate for them, laughing when they brought them back. The household had changed. Mrs. Larch had left. She had asked, with a tight mouth, for a reference. The Duke had given her one. It was honest, which is to say it was useful but not warm. She had gone to a smaller house in the north. The kitchen ran better without her. The nurse was learning signs as fast as she could. So was the butler. So were the 2 younger maids. The Duke had asked Anne one evening over tea whether she would consider beginning a small school on the grounds for the deaf children of the estate. There were 6 of them, he had learned. 6. He had been the master of these lands for 15 years, and he had not known there were 6 deaf children on them, and had said yes. The school opened in a converted stone cottage at the edge of the home farm, and taught. The clergyman from the southern school came up twice a month to help. The Duke paid for everything. He did not put his name on it. He had begun to read. He had asked a bookseller in London for everything that could be found, in any language, on the education of the deaf. The crates had arrived. The Abbé de l'Épée, Gallaudet, Sicard, Pereira. He read at night, slowly, with a dictionary at his elbow, the way a man eats bread after a long hunger. Once he found a sentence that he stopped at for a long time. It was written by the Abbé. It said, in plain French, that a deaf child is not a child without a language. He is a child with a language no one has yet taken the trouble to learn. The Duke had copied that sentence into the back of his late wife's notebook. Then he had closed the notebook and put it back in the drawer for the last time. One evening in May, he and Anne walked in the garden. Edmund was somewhere ahead of them, chasing a younger boy from the new school across the lawn. The two of them were signing furiously as they ran, half arguing, half laughing, the way children do. The Duke watched them. He said, "Anne." She looked up. His hands moved. They were still big, still slow, still clumsy at the smaller shapes. But he had practiced. He signed, carefully, the question he had been holding in his chest for a month. Asterisk, will you stay? Not as a teacher, as my wife. Asterisk. She did not answer for a moment. Then her hands moved. Yes. He nodded once. He could not have spoken if he had wanted to. He took her hand. They walked on. Ahead of them, Edmund had caught the other boy and was tickling him. The other boy was laughing the loud, free, helpless laugh of a child who has been heard. Edmund was laughing the same way. The Duke remembered, suddenly, the first morning he had seen Anne kneel down with the cup and the apple. He remembered the strange shape her fingers had made. He remembered how his son had laughed for the first time in 7 years. He thought, that morning I believed I was watching a small thing, a trick, a game. I did not understand what I was watching. I was watching my son come back to the world. They were married quietly in the parish church in June. Edmund stood beside his father at the front. He held the ring. When the priest asked the Duke to repeat his vows, the Duke spoke them clearly, but he also signed them so that his son would not miss a single word. Edmund cried at the wedding. He was the only one who cried, and thought it was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. The school grew. By autumn it had 12 pupils. By the next spring it had 22. Word traveled. Families brought their children from neighboring counties. The Duke built a second cottage, then a third. He did not put his name on any of them. He told Anne that the names that mattered were the ones the children were learning to make with their hands. One night, late, the Duke sat in his study with a glass of wine and the old notebook open on his lap. The page with his wife's prayer was in front of him. May he one day know words. The Duke smiled, quietly, to himself. He took out his pen. He uncapped it. Below his wife's line, in his own careful hand, he wrote, asterisk, he does. Just not the kind we thought. Asterisk. He closed the notebook. He sat for a long time and listened to the house. Somewhere upstairs his son was asleep. Somewhere down the corridor his wife was reading. Somewhere across the lawn a small cottage with a slate roof was dark and quiet and full of empty desks waiting for morning. A small boy who had once thrown a silver cup at a wall because he had no other way to be heard had grown into a child whose hands could speak. And the Duke, who had once raised a hand to strike, raised his glass instead, and drank and went to bed. The house slept. So finally did he.